Hey everybody, welcome. We are going to take a look today at comparative politics. So what is comparative politics? Well, comparative politics is basically the study comparison of domestic politics across countries. In this class we're going to be taking a look at 6 different countries, 7 if you include the United States. More on that in a little bit. But politics basically is defined as a struggle for power. So we're going to see that, in these 7 countries, and especially in the United States. We talk about what's happening in Congress right now with the elections coming up. We have 2 parties really fighting for power. And whoever wins this election is going to have the ability to make policy. So why study the politics of different nations? Why not just concentrate on the United States? Well, you have to realize part of this is for you guys to be better citizens. If you want to know what policies, as young adults who are going to be voting soon, should impact the nation positively or negatively, it helps to look at what other countries are doing. For example, one of the biggest things used, we'll talk about how accurate or inaccurate this is Barack Obama and healthcare, all right, Obamacare. And some people have said this is such a socialist policy. Well, we're going to find out that this isn't as socialist as what's happened in many European countries. But, some people argue, especially, Democrats, that this is good for the country, right? Because we have, over 40 million people uninsured. About 20 million of these are children. And so, hey, this is a good thing. On the other hand, we have Republicans who say this is socializing medicine. This is going to destroy healthcare as we know it. It's going to hurt the economy, throw us into deeper debt. And so the question is here, well, who's right, who's wrong? And by taking a look at some of these other countries, the UK in particular, we're going to have a better understanding of, should we pursue this policy or not? So in a class like this, this guy is going to be your role model. Doesn't everyone want to be just like him? I bet you do. This is a professor at the University of Michigan. He is a political scientist. And basically, political scientists use the comparative method to make comparisons and assumptions about different countries we study. We study, like I said, 6 other countries besides the United States. Some of them are similar, some of them are different. And you guys are going to basically make huge generalizations about these countries, saying, oh, for example, Nigeria and Iran, we can see the similarities here in the government compared to, Nigeria and the UK. So in order to do this, you guys are going to be using inductive reasoning to start off with. And that's just looking at a country by a case-by-case basis. We're going to start off with Nigeria. And, well, let's start off with North Korea, a country we won't be studying. How do we know that democracy has failed in North Korea? Well, by looking at North Korea, we see that there's high levels of nationalism. And one of my favorite documentaries that goes by the name of Undercover in North Korea has one of our journalists who basically goes undercover in North Korea with a medical team, and she basically takes a look at Pyongyang, which is the capital city. And the level of propaganda there is astonishing. Basically, these people, more or less live in the blind about what is going on in the world. And there's huge levels of nationalism there where, you have portraits of Kim Jong-il in everyone's living room all over the place. They thank Kim Jong-il for everything. And so if we were to take a look at why democracy hasn't developed in North Korea, we could say, well, nationalism. But that's just looking at one country. That's inductive reasoning. If we want to take a look deductively, we would take a look at North Korea along with several other countries why democracy hasn't developed. For example, the reason that democracy didn't develop in Iraq until 2010 and this former Soviet Union until the early 1990s, this didn't have to do with nationalism, it had to do with a host of completely separate reasons. So on slide 6 you can see the 7 countries that we're going to study. We'll start off with Nigeria, then take a look at Iran and Mexico, come back with Great Britain, and finish off with China and the Soviet Union. We'll be talking about the United States throughout the year as well, and actually will be probably, when we talk about the Six Nations in comparison to the United States, about 40% of the time will be spent on the Six Nations, 60% of the time spent on the United States. Now, slide 7 shows the 5 methods that we're going to use to study these separate countries. And these 5 methods are the same methods that comparative scientists use in looking at the politics of countries. So here on slide 8 you can see the 5 different comparative methods. We are going to integrate these 5 methods into Nigeria, the first country that we're going to study. Now, the one that we really won't integrate into it that much is method number 1, and that's a comparative method. And that's what you're going to hear about on the rest of the slide. So here in slide 9 you should see something that looks pretty similar to what you guys have seen in your science classes. This is something that you know is a scientific method where you form a hypothesis and you test it. So a hypothesis is a relationship between 2 or more independent variables. So for example, in Iraq, would poverty, which is a dependent variable, cause low levels of formal education, which is an independent variable? I'm sure all of you guys will have your opinions about this, but we need to look at research. We need to look at data, look at facts. And so political scientists, which you guys will do in this class, not so much for Iraq, but for the other 7 countries we study, for example, if we would make that comparison with the United States, all right, would poverty, let's say for example in the west side of Milwaukee, would that cause low levels of education? Well, if you look at a simple example like Milwaukee, you may say, yeah, but okay, let's take into account some of these other cities that have even lower levels of poverty but have better educational systems. So, once again, that inductive versus deductive reasoning, looking at one example compared to many different examples. You also have to realize that correlation is not causality. So correlation is when there is a relationship between 2 variables. But causation is when one variable actually causes another. So, for example, here in Milwaukee, there is poverty and low levels of educational achievement. So, that's definitely correlated, but is one thing causing the other? And there's a lot more things that we have to look at to go into that. So, for example, crime, is that caused by low levels of education funding? Well, that's not necessarily a correlation. Could be a causation, but not a correlation. So, in order to find causation rather than correlation, you have to look at a lot of data. One of the things that we'll do is group countries. So, for example, the United States and its allies was basically how we grouped countries before the 1990s. And we also had the Soviet Union as its allies. That was a second group of countries. Finally, we had third world countries. These would be a lot of your African countries, Southeast Asian countries. They would be third world countries. So basically nations that were nations that did not fit into the first 2 categories. Now, that was pre-1990. That's, if you would have been coming to school here in your Thunderbird, Firebird, rolling up your jean pants, spiking your hair up like Mr. Tillman, listening to Mr. T. This is the way you would have grouped countries in this class back then. Not anymore. Slide 11 shows the 3 differences between countries, or how we group countries now. And that's advanced democracies, communist and post-communist countries, and the less developed countries. So advanced democracies, that would be countries like the UK and the United States. Those are advanced democracies. They have well-established democratic governments and very, very high economic development. Your post-communist countries, well, the Soviet Union, now Russia. We'll take a look at them. And we still have a communist country that we take a look at, and that's China. And finally, your less developed countries, that would be Nigeria, and your newly industrialized countries, which would be Iran and Mexico. So the final slide, slide 12, just has the 6 countries